60 kilometers south of Riyadh, in the pre-dawn darkness of March 7, 2026, the air raid sirens at Prince Sultan Air Base started screaming. Not a drill, not a test, not a precaution. Ballistic missiles, confirmed, tracked, inbound, were heading directly for one of the most strategically important American military installations in the entire Middle East. A base that, just days earlier, Chinese commercial satellites had photographed bristling with American power. 13 KC-135 aerial refueling tankers, 6 E-3 Sentry AWACS surveillance aircraft, Patriot missile batteries, THAAD interceptors, dozens of American warplanes that had been quietly repositioned there in the weeks before the war began, the entire logistics backbone of America's air campaign against Iran, sitting in the desert 80 kilometers southeast of the Saudi capital. And Iranian missiles were on their way. The Saudi Ministry of Defense posted the announcement on X within minutes of the incident. 3 ballistic missiles launched toward Prince Sultan Air Base had been intercepted and destroyed. That was the official statement. Clean, factual, controlled. But what the official statement did not convey, what requires context to fully understand, is what that moment meant. What it meant that Iran had just fired ballistic missiles at a base housing American troops on Saudi soil. What it meant that Saudi Arabia, a country that had publicly declared it would not allow its territory to be used for military operations against Iran, now found itself in the direct line of fire regardless. And what it meant that the THAAD radar system near the base, as revealed by CNN satellite imagery from March 1st, had already been struck. The radar tent charred, debris scattered across the compound, smoke rising from the site where the antenna that pointed northeast toward Iran had been positioned just days before. This is the story of what happened at Prince Sultan Air Base. And it is not just the story of missiles and interceptors. It is the story of how Iran chose its targets, what those targets revealed about Iranian strategy, how Saudi Arabia found itself trapped between a superpower it hosted and a regional adversary it had been trying to make peace with, and what the sustained campaign against Prince Sultan tells us about where this war is going. To understand why Iran targeted Prince Sultan Air Base with such persistence, you have to understand what the base actually is and what it actually does. Prince Sultan Air Base sits in Al-Kharj Governorate, a strategic geographic position that places it far enough from the Gulf coastline to complicate sea-launched cruise missile attacks, far enough from the Yemeni border to reduce Houthi threat vectors, and deep enough in the Saudi interior to be considered safer than coastal facilities. The United States had been using Prince Sultan as a forward operating hub since the 1990s. During Operation Southern Watch, the years-long American air campaign to enforce the no-fly zone over southern Iraq after the Gulf War, Prince Sultan was the primary base for many of those operations. When Saddam Hussein's ballistic missiles threatened Israel in 1991 part, it was from Prince Sultan that the base has more than 3 decades of continuous American military presence embedded in its identity. After the September 11th attacks in 2001, the United States actually withdrew most of its combat aircraft from Prince Sultan under pressure from the Saudi government, which faced enormous domestic political sensitivity about the permanent presence of American warplanes on Saudi soil. The base went into a quieter period. But in 2019, after a series of Iranian attacks on oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman, attacks that were never conclusively prosecuted by any international body, but that were attributed to Iran, the United States came back 2,000 troops, B-1B bombers, F-22 Raptor stealth fighters, Patriot missile batteries. The 378th Air Expeditionary Wing was formally reactivated at Prince Sultan on December 17, 2019, with a stated mission to provide strategic depth and increased defensive support. That was the official language. In operational reality, it meant that the United States was pre-positioning serious combat power in the Saudi interior in direct response to Iranian aggression, and doing it at a base that Iran had been watching closely for decades. By February 2026, Prince Sultan had become something far more significant than a forward defensive outpost. Chinese commercial satellite imagery, analyzed and published in the weeks immediately before the war began, captured the scale of the American buildup at the base in startling detail. Between February 17th and February 21st, just 1 week, the number of visible American aircraft at Prince Sultan grew from 27 to at least 43 platforms. The satellite images showed 13 KC-135 Stratotanker aerial refueling aircraft lined up on the apron, 6 E-3 Sentry AWACS surveillance aircraft. The massive Boeing 707-derived platforms with the rotating radar disc on top is the aircraft that can track hundreds of aerial contacts simultaneously across hundreds of miles, the aircraft that serve as the eyes of an entire air campaign. The imagery showed Patriot missile batteries positioned around the base perimeter. It showed the THAAD radar antenna pointing northeast, toward Iran. The strategic function of those tankers and AWACS cannot be overstated. KC-135 tankers are not weapons. They do not carry bombs. They do not fire missiles. What they do is multiply the effective combat radius of every aircraft that depends on them. A B-2 Spirit stealth bomber flying from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri to targets in Iran requires multiple aerial refueling contacts over the Atlantic and Mediterranean to complete a 34-hour round-trip mission. F-35s operating from bases in the region require tanker support for extended operations deep inside Iranian territory. The 13 KC-135s at Prince Sultan were not there to defend Saudi Arabia. They were there to keep American strike aircraft flying over Iran around the clock without interruption. They were the fuel pipeline of Operation Epic Fury, and the 6 E-3 Sentry AWACS aircraft were the command and control backbone. Managing airspace over an enormous multi-country battle space, routing strike packages, coordinating the simultaneous operations of American and Israeli aircraft, maintaining the battle picture that kept a complex multi-service air war functioning as a single coherent force, rather than a chaotic series of independent missions. Iran saw all of this. Iran had been watching Prince Sultan via satellite imagery for months. Chinese commercial satellites had documented the buildup, and that imagery was publicly available. Whatever Iran's own surveillance capabilities added, the picture was clear. Prince Sultan was not a symbolic target. It was a functional node in the operational architecture of the campaign being waged against Iran. The THAAD radar at Prince Sultan, pointed northeast toward Iran, was contributing to the early warning and tracking picture that fed missile defense engagements across the entire region. The AWACS aircraft flying out of Prince Sultan were managing the airspace that American and Israeli strike aircraft used. The tankers at Prince Sultan were keeping those strike aircraft flying. Every Iranian missile battery destroyed in the early days of the conflict. Every Iranian command center hit overnight. Every IRGC commander killed by a precision bomb. A portion of the operational infrastructure that enabled those strikes traced back through a logistics chain that ran through Prince Sultan Air Base. So Iran targeted Prince Sultan, repeatedly, systematically, persistently, in a way that tells you something important about Iranian targeting doctrine. The first strikes came on the night of February 28th, the same night the war began. Within hours of the United States and Israel launching Operation Epic Fury, Iran fired ballistic missiles at Prince Sultan. Initial assessments confirmed impacts on base infrastructure. Satellite imagery captured on March 1st showed smoke rising from a compound near the base, where the THAAD radar system had been positioned. The tent sheltering the radar antenna was badly charred. Debris was scattered around the compound. CNN, analyzing the imagery with support from defense analysts, confirmed that the THAAD battery radar site near Prince Sultan had been struck. The AN-TPY-2 transportable radar, the critical sensor system that makes THAAD work, the system that costs just under $500 million, the system split across 5 40-foot trailers, appeared to have been destroyed or seriously damaged. A pair of craters in the sand near the radar suggested multiple attempts, indicating that Iran had dedicated multiple missiles to ensure the radar was neutralized. This was not an accident of targeting. Iran did not fire missiles at Prince Sultan and happened to hit the THAAD radar. The THAAD radar was the priority target. This was deliberate, precise, intelligence-driven targeting. Someone identified the AN-TPY-2 radar at Prince Sultan as a high-value objective. Someone calculated which ballistic missile could reach it with sufficient accuracy. Someone integrated that targeting solution into the first wave of retaliatory strikes. And within hours of the war beginning, that radar was burning. The implication is significant and deeply uncomfortable for American planners. Iran had pre-identified, pre-targeted, and pre-planned the destruction of specific American missile defense sensors at Prince Sultan before the war started. This was not reactive improvisation. This was prepared targeting executed on a pre-existing list. The pattern of attacks on Prince Sultan over the following days confirmed the methodical nature of the campaign. On March 1st, Saudi air defenses intercepted 8 drones over Riyadh and the Al-Kharj military complex, the zone that includes Prince Sultan. On March the 2nd, 5 hostile drones were intercepted and destroyed near the base. On March 3rd, the Saudi Ministry of Defense reported intercepting 8 more drones near Riyadh and Al-Kharj. Later that day, the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh was struck by 2 Iranian drones, causing a fire and limited structural damage, demonstrating that Iran was willing to hit diplomatic targets in the Saudi capital itself, not just military facilities. 2 cruise missiles were intercepted near Al-Kharj on March 4th, again near Prince Sultan. On March 5th, 3 drones were downed east of Al-Kharj. And on March 7th came the most significant single incident in the campaign against Prince Sultan. 3 ballistic missiles intercepted by Saudi air defenses, followed in the same day by additional cruise missiles and drones targeting the Al-Kharj area. Across 8 days of conflict, Prince Sultan Air Base and its surrounding area were targeted on every single day. Ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, attack drones, multiple platforms, multiple approach vectors, no single day of relief. This is what a sustained, methodical suppression campaign looks like in practice. Iran was not trying to land a single dramatic blow against Prince Sultan and move on. Iran was applying continuous pressure, probing the air defenses, exhausting the interceptor batteries, mapping the response patterns, and demonstrating to the Saudi government and the American military leadership that nowhere in Saudi Arabia was beyond reach. The Saudi air defense performance during this campaign deserves specific attention because it was genuinely impressive in several respects, and also revealing in others. Saudi Arabia has been investing enormous sums in air defense capability for years. The United States approved a potential sale of PASI-3 Patriot interceptors to Saudi Arabia worth approximately $9 billion in January 2026, just weeks before the war began. Saudi Arabia also holds an $8.8 billion defense contract portfolio signed at the World Defense Show in Riyadh in February 2026. These are not small numbers. Saudi Arabia's air defense architecture, backed by decades of American training and equipment, represents some of the most capable systems in the world outside of Israel itself, and those systems performed. The vast majority of the missiles and drones Iran fired at Prince Sultan and surrounding targets were intercepted. Confirmed impacts, missiles that got through and hit the base, were limited. The official Saudi statements consistently describe successful interceptions, but the Thayad radar near the base was still destroyed in the first hours of the conflict. And the pattern of sustained daily attacks continued across 8 days despite those successful interceptions, which tells you something about the mathematics of the engagement. Iran was not deterred by successful interceptions. Iran was absorbing the interceptions as acceptable losses in a campaign designed to achieve results through persistence rather than through individual missile success. Every intercepted missile still forces a response. Every intercepted missile still expends a Patriot or THAAD interceptor. Every day of sustained attack still drains the magazine one engagement at a time. Iran possesses an estimated arsenal of approximately 2,000 ballistic missiles, plus thousands of cruise missiles and attack drones. Saudi Arabia has a finite stock of Patriot PC-3 interceptors and a single THAAD battery. The United States operates only 8 THAAD batteries in total, worldwide. 4 of those were deployed to the Middle East region before and during the conflict. Depleting those systems' magazines by forcing continuous engagements against a sustained campaign is not an ineffective strategy for Iran. It is precisely the correct strategy for an adversary whose deepest advantage lies in quantity and persistence rather than in the kind of precision strike capability that the United States possesses. There is a geopolitical dimension to the Prince Sultan strikes that goes beyond the purely military, and it is one of the most consequential aspects of this entire story. Saudi Arabia publicly stated, before the war began, that it would not allow its territory to be used for military operations against Iran. That statement was made as the American military buildup at Prince Sultan was accelerating. It was a statement that attempted to occupy a political middle ground. Hosting American forces for defensive purposes while publicly refusing to endorse offensive operations. That middle ground evaporated the moment Operation Epic Fury began. The American KC-135 tankers at Prince Sultan were keeping the strike aircraft flying. The American AWACS at Prince Sultan were managing the battle. The American missile defense systems at Prince Sultan were protecting assets integral to the offensive campaign. Saudi Arabia was, functionally, a participant in the conflict, regardless of its stated political position, and Iran treated it accordingly. Iran's ambassador to Saudi Arabia was still in Riyadh when the strikes began. That detail is extraordinary. The two countries had signed a diplomatic normalization agreement brokered by China in 2023, a landmark event in Middle Eastern diplomacy that was widely described as a historic realignment. Saudi Arabia and Iran had established formal diplomatic relations for the first time in years, and within days of the war starting, Iranian ballistic missiles were falling on Saudi military installations, and Iranian drones were striking the United States Embassy in Riyadh, setting fires in a compound located in the heart of the Saudi capital. The 2023 normalization agreement held for less than 3 years before the reality of Iranian ballistic missile strikes on Saudi soil rendered its practical significance moot. The Saudi government's response was carefully calibrated to the impossible position it occupied. After Iranian strikes hit Saudi targets, starting on March 1st, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman chaired a cabinet session on March 3rd, from which Saudi Arabia declared it reserves the full right to respond to Iranian aggression. In an extraordinary ministerial meeting held in Riyadh on March 1st, the GCC affirmed the collective right of member states to defend themselves against what it called treacherous Iranian aggression. Saudi Arabia issued a sharp condemnation following Iranian attacks on Azerbaijan and Turkish airspace. The language escalated steadily over 8 days, from condemnation to reserved right of response to active military engagements. But Saudi Arabia has not entered the conflict offensively. Its air defenses are shooting down Iranian missiles. It has not launched strikes on Iran. It is threading an incredibly fine needle, using American defense systems to protect American assets on Saudi soil while avoiding a formal entry into the war. And Iran's sustained campaign against Prince Sultan is designed partly to make that needle impossible to thread. The strike on the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh on March 3rd represented a specific escalatory threshold. 2 Iranian drones hit the embassy compound, causing a fire and minor structural damage. No American personnel were reported killed. But an attack on a diplomatic mission in the capital city of a country with which Iran maintained official diplomatic relations is not a miscalculation. It is a message. The IRGC had previously declared its intention to destroy American political centers in the region. The embassy strike was the execution of that declared intent. UK Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper responded publicly, stating that Iranian strikes on Riyadh, including on the US Embassy, were completely unacceptable. Pakistan's foreign minister, citing the mutual defense agreement Pakistan signed with Saudi Arabia in September 2025, reminded Iran of that obligation. The diplomatic reverberations of Iran striking the American embassy in Riyadh spread through the international community with a speed that reflected how genuinely alarming the escalation was. The broader context of what Prince Sultan's sustained targeting means for the operational picture of Operation Epic Fury is critical to understand. American military planners designed the air campaign around the assumption that bases like Prince Sultan would provide a stable, protected logistics foundation for sustained operations against Iran. The tankers would fly, the AWACS would orbit, and the intelligence pipeline from Prince Sultan's radar systems would flow uninterrupted into the targeting cycle. That assumption held, barely, because Saudi air defenses intercepted most of the incoming threats. But most is not all. The THAAD radar near the base was destroyed in the first 24 hours. Continued daily attacks kept the base in a state of operational stress. Every mission that had to be delayed because the base was under air raid alert, every sortie that launched a few minutes late because crews were sheltering during an incoming missile warning, every intelligence update that was delayed because personnel were in protective positions. These are not dramatic losses that show up in battle damage assessments. They are friction. They are the small, cumulative degradation of operational tempo that sustained attacks impose even when the individual attacks are mostly intercepted. This is what military analysts call the indirect effects of missile attack. The direct effect of a missile is the damage it causes if it hits. The indirect effect is everything that happens, even when it misses. The air raid warnings that interrupt work cycles, the psychological pressure on personnel, the defensive resources devoted to protection rather than offense, the political pressure on the host nation government, the diversion of THAAD interceptors from offensive support to defensive protection of the base itself. Iran's campaign against Prince Sultan was designed to generate indirect effects at scale, even in the face of a defense system good enough to intercept most of the incoming missiles. There is a specific and deeply uncomfortable irony in the location of the THAAD battery that Iran targeted and destroyed near Prince Sultan. THAAD is primarily an offensive support system. It is not just a defensive tool for protecting the base it sits next to. The AN and TPY-2 radar that Iran destroyed, the radar that was pointing northeast toward Iran, was contributing to the regional missile defense picture, tracking Iranian missile launches in their early phases, providing queuing data to other interceptor systems across the theater, improving the overall quality of the engagement picture for Patriot batteries in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, and Kuwait. By destroying that radar in the first hours of the conflict, Iran degraded the quality of missile defense across multiple countries simultaneously. One strike on one radar tent, achieved with a relatively small number of Iranian ballistic missiles in the first wave of attacks, reduced the defensive effectiveness of an interconnected missile defense network across the entire Arabian Peninsula. CNN's report on the destruction of THAAD radars across the region was one of the most significant intelligence disclosures of the early conflict. Satellite imagery showed not just the Prince Sultan THAAD radar site, but a THAAD battery radar at Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan, more than 500 miles from Iran, showing a blackened radar system with a pair of 13-foot craters in the sand near it, all 5 40-foot trailers appearing destroyed or seriously damaged, while a THAAD battery radar near Al Ruwais in the UAE showed dark markings from apparent strikes on 3 buildings at the battery site. 3 different THAAD radars in 3 different countries destroyed in the opening days of the conflict. Iran had pre-targeted the entire regional THAAD architecture and systematically worked through it in the first wave of strikes. At $500 million per radar system, the destruction of 3 AN/TPY-2 radars represented $1,500 million in American military hardware destroyed, and more importantly, the degradation of the missile defense sensing picture at exactly the moment Iran was firing hundreds of ballistic missiles at targets across the region. The Saudi government's response to all of this, the missile strikes, the drone attacks, the embassy strike, the THAAD radar destruction, reflects the extraordinary difficulty of Saudi Arabia's geopolitical position in the 2026 conflict. Saudi Arabia needs American military protection. The U.S. forces at Prince Sultan are not just a convenience. They are an essential component of Saudi Arabia's own air defense architecture. The Patriot batteries at Prince Sultan are staffed by American personnel. The THAAD battery that was destroyed was American equipment. Saudi Arabia does not have the indigenous capability to defend its territory against sustained Iranian ballistic missile barrages without American support. And yet, hosting American forces and assets at Prince Sultan made Saudi Arabia a target for exactly the Iranian strikes it needed American protection against. The logic is circular and inescapable. Saudi Arabia requires American defense capability against Iran. That defense capability makes Saudi Arabia a target for Iran, and the attacks on Saudi territory demonstrate the need for the American defense capability that caused the attacks. The GCC's collective declaration of the right to self-defense, the Saudi cabinet statement reserving the right to respond, the condemnations issued by Riyadh, all of these are political positioning by a government trying to maintain credibility and deterrence without entering a full war against a neighbor with which it nominally still maintains diplomatic relations. Iran's ambassador to Saudi Arabia, still in Riyadh when drones were hitting the American embassy, was a political anomaly of extraordinary proportions. A country whose diplomats are in the capital is simultaneously firing ballistic missiles at that capital's suburbs. The norms that govern international relations in peacetime do not have clear guidance for this situation. The humanitarian picture beyond Prince Sultan Air Base also deserves attention. Saudi Arabia issued nationwide alerts urging civilians and military personnel to exercise caution as each wave of Iranian attacks developed. In Bahrain, Iranian strikes caused a fire at the Bapco refinery in Maamir and damaged hotels and residential buildings in Manama. In Kuwait, a total of 178 missiles and 384 drones were targeted at the country across the conflict's opening days. In Qatar, 120 missiles and 53 drones. A Kuwaiti girl of 11 years old of Iranian descent was killed in an Iranian drone attack in Kuwait. The kind of civilian casualty that makes the rhetoric of precision military targeting collide with the indiscriminate reality of a weapons system that misses its intended target or fragments on intercept and falls on civilian areas. Oil prices jumped 10% as the Strait of Hormuz was threatened, with 150 tankers backing up near the choke point as maritime traffic plummeted by 86%. The conflict at Prince Sultan Air Base did not stay at Prince Sultan Air Base. Its economic consequences are already reshaping global energy markets. What is happening at Prince Sultan Air Base is a specific and vivid illustration of the broader strategic logic Iran is executing in this conflict. Iran cannot defeat the United States in a conventional air campaign. Iran cannot match the stealth aircraft, the precision-guided munitions, the electronic warfare capability, the carrier strike groups, or the satellite intelligence architecture that American power projects. Iran knows this. Iran's strategy was never to win a symmetric military confrontation. Iran's strategy was to impose costs on American operations, on American allies, on American interceptor stockpiles, on the political cohesion of the coalition opposing it, at a rate that American domestic politics and allied governments could not sustain indefinitely. Prince Sultan Air Base is the most visible symbol of that strategy in action. Iran fires missiles. Saudi Arabia intercepts most of them. The THAAD radar gets destroyed anyway. The political pressure on Riyadh intensifies. The interceptor magazines deplete, and Iran fires more missiles. The White House statement that the United States would need 4 to 6 weeks to meet its war objectives in Operation Epic Fury tells you how American planners are thinking about the timeline. 4 to 6 weeks of sustained operations from bases including Prince Sultan, from carrier strike groups in the Arabian Sea, from Diego Garcia, from RAF Lakenheath. 4 to 6 weeks of Iranian ballistic missile strikes on those bases. 4 to 6 weeks of Saudi interceptors being fired. Saudi political calculations being stress tested. Saudi interceptor stockpiles being measured against production timelines. 4 to 6 weeks of a war that generates roughly $1 billion a day in American operational costs against an adversary that can fire millions of dollars in missiles for a fraction of that cost. Prince Sultan Air Base is not falling. Its defenders are performing admirably. The intercept rates are high. American operations are continuing, but the sustained, systematic daily campaign Iran has waged against one of the most important American military installations in the Middle East, from the first missiles in the pre-dawn hours of February 28th to the ongoing barrages 8 days later, has demonstrated something that every military planner watching this conflict is recording carefully. The era in which American forward bases in the Middle East could host the logistics backbone of a major air campaign against Iran while operating behind a comfortable defensive buffer is over. Iran has the missiles, the range, the accuracy, and the willingness to strike those bases persistently. The $500 million radar is destroyed, the tankers are still flying, the AWACS are still orbiting, and the missiles are still coming. In the desert, 80 kilometers southeast of Riyadh, the sirens at Prince Sultan Air Base keep sounding. Each time they do, the cost of this war, measured in interceptors and radar systems and political capital and the quiet anxiety of the men and women stationed there, grows a little higher. And the question that no official statement has yet answered is how much higher it has to go before the calculus of the conflict changes. Because Iran is betting it knows that number, and Prince Sultan Air Base is the place where that bet is being collected, one ballistic missile at a time.